The Last Dawn. What would you do if the empire you spent your entire life building was already being dismantled from the inside, and the person holding the knife was someone you trusted with your life? Vincent Moretti ruled the most feared criminal organization in America for over 2 decades. He never ran. He never begged. He never lost. But tonight, a single anonymous message arrived. And for the first time in 20 years, Vincent Moretti felt something crawl through his chest that he hadn't felt since he was a boy watching his father weep in the dark. Fear. If this story hits you, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Part 1. The Message. The envelope arrived at 11:47 p.m. No postage, no return address. Just a plain white rectangle sitting on Vincent Moretti's desk like it had always been there, like it belonged there, like someone had walked through 3 layers of armed security and a steel-reinforced door and simply placed it down between his glass of scotch and the framed photograph of his father without anyone seeing a single thing. Vincent stood in the doorway of his private office on the 14th floor of the Aldrin building, a legitimate real estate firm on paper, a nerve center for everything that was not legitimate in practice, and stared at the envelope for 11 seconds without moving. He counted. He had a habit of counting when something was wrong. It was a trick his father had taught him. Count. Don't react. Never let the room know your pulse just doubled. He crossed to his desk, sat down, and picked up the envelope. The paper was thick, the kind that cost money. He turned it over twice. His name was printed on the front in block letters, plain black ink, no flourish. Vincent Moretti. Just that. No title, no honorific. Not Mr. Moretti, not the Don. Just his name, stripped of everything that usually surrounded it like armor. He opened it. Inside was a single index card. On it, typed in the same plain block print, "I have your father's files, every transaction, every name, every body. Meet me at the Callaway Street Freight Depot before sunrise, or these go to the Federal Building on 5th by morning. Come alone, or they go tonight." Vincent read it twice. Set it down. Picked up his glass and took a slow drink of scotch, feeling the burn settle in the center of his chest. Then he set the glass down and sat very still for a long time, the way a man sits when the ground beneath him has just shifted in a direction he cannot yet measure. His father, Carlo Moretti, had been dead for 6 years. He had died in this same building on a Tuesday afternoon in October, sitting in the chair Vincent now occupied. The official cause was cardiac arrest. Everyone in the organization knew Carlo's heart had simply given out under the accumulated weight of 61 years of hard living. The cigarettes, the red meat, the sleepless nights, the decades of pressure that came with running an operation the size of a small country's GDP through networks of front companies, union contracts, port dealings, and arrangements with people whose names were never spoken aloud in rooms with open windows. Vincent had inherited everything. The organization, the debts, the loyalties, the enemies. He had run it for 6 years without a serious threat to his authority. He had expanded the operation into new territories, modernized the financial structure, insulated the key players behind enough legitimate business infrastructure that federal investigators had circled the outer edges of the organization for years without ever finding the thread that would pull the whole thing apart. Or so he had believed. Files. His father's files. Vincent stood up from his desk, walked to the window, and looked down at the city. 14 floors below, the street was quiet. A delivery truck moved through an intersection. 2 men smoked outside a bar 2 blocks down. The ordinary machinery of a city at midnight, grinding forward without any awareness that the man watching from above had just been handed something that felt, in his chest, like a lit fuse. He pulled out his phone and called Sal Dentini. Sal picked up on the second ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant something else was already wrong somewhere in the organization tonight, and Sal had been managing it quietly without bothering Vincent about it yet, which was both why Vincent trusted him and why Vincent occasionally found him infuriating. "You see anything unusual tonight?" Vincent said. A pause. The kind that wasn't about thinking. It was about choosing. Define unusual. "Someone came into this building tonight, into my office, left something on my desk." The silence on the other end of the line had a different texture now. That's not possible. I'm looking at it. Manny's on the door. Kowalski's on the floor. There are 3 cameras between the lobby and your... I know what there is, Sal. Someone came through it anyway. Vincent kept his voice flat, even, the way his father had taught him to speak when he was most afraid. Get me the footage, all of it. And I want to know if anything else came in tonight. Any communication, any contact, anything out of the ordinary from any of the families. Anything. Vincent, tonight. He hung up, stood at the window for another 30 seconds. Then he went back to the desk, picked up the index card again, and read it a 3rd time. Something about the phrasing snagged in him, not the threat. The threat was clear enough. What snagged was the specificity. Every transaction, every name, every body. That wasn't a bluff. People who bluffed were vague. They said things like sensitive information or damaging evidence. They didn't list categories. The person who wrote this knew what was in those files because they had already read them. And if they had read them, and if those files were what the card implied, then the question was not whether Vincent's empire was in danger. The question was how long it had already been burning before he noticed the smoke. He poured another finger of scotch, didn't drink it, just held the glass and thought about his father. Carlo Moretti had not been a sentimental man. He had been disciplined, unsentimental, occasionally brutal in the way that men who survive long enough in this kind of life are forced to become. He had never discussed the origins of the organization with Vincent, not in any real detail. The standard version, the one Vincent had grown up absorbing through proximity and inference, was that Carlo had built the operation from nothing. A young man from nothing, with nothing, who had clawed his way up through 30 years of the kind of work that left marks on a man's hands and soul both, and had eventually become something that other men feared and respected in the particular way they fear and respect things that have survived long enough to become permanent. Vincent had believed that version, had been proud of it, even. Not the criminality itself, maybe, but the scale of it, the sheer architecture of will that it represented. If the files said something different, the pride collapsed into something else entirely. Something Vincent did not have a word for yet. His phone buzzed. Sal again. A text this time. Checked footage. All cameras on 14 show a 40-minute gap starting at 10:12. Not looped, actually deleted. Professional. Also, Caruso family made contact 2 hours ago. Wants a sit-down. Not requesting. Demanding. Vincent stared at the text. The Caruso family had not spoken to him directly in 8 months. Their territory ran along the eastern ports, overlapping in 3 specific places with operations Vincent had expanded into over the past 2 years. The tension between the organizations had been managed through intermediaries, through the careful application of money and influence, and the implicit understanding that neither side was willing to absorb the cost of an open war. A demand for a sit-down at this hour, without the usual diplomatic groundwork, that wasn't a coincidence. Someone was moving tonight, multiple pieces, multiple directions. The envelope on his desk was not an isolated event. It was a signal. He called his driver. Then he called the only lawyer he fully trusted, Marcus Hale, a criminal defense attorney who had spent 30 years knowing exactly where the line was between representation and complicity and had never once crossed it in a way that could be proven, and told him to be available by morning, no questions until then. Then he put on his jacket, slipped the index card into his inside pocket, and left the office. The drive across the city took 22 minutes. Vincent sat in the back of the black Suburban and watched the streets unreal past the window. The city at this hour was its own kind of creature. The decent people sleeping, the rest of them out doing what the dark permitted. He had spent most of his adult life in that second category and had stopped thinking of it in moral terms a long time ago. You either lived in the world as it actually was, or you spent your life being surprised by it. His father had taught him that too. He wondered now, for the first time, what his father had actually meant by it. The Callaway Street Freight Depot sat at the dead end of a commercial block that hadn't been fully operational in 6 years. A shipping company had gone under, taking the block's primary tenant with it, and the surrounding buildings had never recovered. Broken windows, loading docks sealed with rusted chain, weeds splitting the asphalt in the parking lot. The kind of place that the city forgot about because it was easier to forget than to fix. Vincent's driver pulled to the curb a block and a half away. Vincent looked at the depot for a moment, then opened the door and got out. "Wait here." "Vincent, wait here." He walked the block and a half alone, hands in his jacket pockets, his breath visible in the cold air. The temperature had dropped hard after midnight. His shoes sounded flat and deliberate on the cracked sidewalk. He didn't hurry. Men who hurried to meetings like this showed their fear before they even opened their mouths. The depot's main entrance was a loading door 30 feet wide. It was open. Not by much, just enough. A 2-foot gap of darkness. Someone had unlocked it and left it cracked, which meant they'd been here long enough to unlock it, and they were inside waiting, which meant they were either very confident or very desperate, and there was sometimes very little difference between the two. Vincent pushed the door open with one hand and walked in. The interior was enormous and dark. Bare concrete floor. Steel rafters 40 feet up. Whatever the building had last stored, it was gone, leaving only the ghost of industrial use. Oil stains on the floor, the skeletons of shelving units along the far wall, a forklift with flat tires sitting abandoned in the corner like a relic from a previous civilization. In the center of the floor, under a portable work lamp that threw a hard circle of yellow light, sat a folding table. On the table was a cardboard box. Standing beside the table was a man Vincent had never seen before. He was in his mid-50s, medium height, lean in the way that people get lean when they don't eat enough rather than when they exercise. A narrow face, glasses, gray at his temples. He was wearing a coat that was too thin for the temperature, and he was standing with his arms at his sides, very still, like a man who had decided in advance that any sudden movement might kill him and was therefore not going to make any. "Vincent Moretti," the man said. "You have a name," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. "Elias Harlow." He said it without hesitation, which meant either he wasn't afraid or he decided that being afraid was no longer a useful posture. "I worked for your father, not for the organization, for the man. I was his accountant. Private books only. The ones nobody else saw." Vincent stopped 10 feet away. "My father didn't have a private accountant. Your father had 3 people who knew the full picture of what those books contained. 2 of them are dead. I'm the one who's still here." Harlow glanced at the box. "I've had these for 6 years. Since the day he died. He left instructions." "What kind of instructions?" "To find you. Not immediately. He was specific about the timing. He said I'd know when it was right." Something moved across Harlow's face. Not fear, exactly. Closer to the expression of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is finally setting it down. "The timing is right, Mr. Moretti. Things are moving that you don't know about yet. People inside your organization have already made contact with the Caruso family, not through intermediaries, directly." The temperature in Vincent's chest dropped about 10 degrees. "Say that again." 2 of your captains. I don't know which ones yet. The contact I have is limited, but the arrangement that's being discussed involves handing over the financial infrastructure of your operation in exchange for guaranteed protection and a percentage of the consolidated territory once your organization is dissolved. Vincent heard the words, processed each one with the focused, almost clinical calm that descended on him in moments of genuine crisis. Not manufactured calm, not performance, but the real thing. The thing his body did when the stakes crossed a certain threshold and adrenaline stopped being useful, and something colder and more precise took its place. People inside his organization, 2 captains, already in contact with Caruso. He looked at the box. "What's in there?" "Everything," Harlow said. 40 years of documentation, every deal, every payment, every arrangement his organization made and who it was made with. Your father recorded it all, starting from the very beginning, before the organization was what it became, before your father became what he became. Harlow paused. "The story of how the Empire started, Mr. Moretti, it's not the story you were told." Vincent walked to the table. He lifted the lid off the box. Inside, folders, dozens of them, some yellowed, some newer, organized by year. On top of the first folder was a handwritten note on the same thick paper as the envelope that had arrived on his desk. The handwriting was his father's. He recognized it instantly. The compressed, slightly left-leaning script that Carlo Moretti had used his entire life. The note read, Vincent. If you're reading this, then things have reached the point I always feared they would. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth while I was alive. I was afraid. I was afraid for you and afraid for your mother and afraid, at the end, that you would hate me for what I had let us become. Please read everything before you decide what to do. Don't react with your fists. You're smarter than I was. Use it. Vincent stood over the box for a long time. He didn't pick up a folder. He didn't speak. He just read the note twice more and then set it back down very carefully, the way you set down something fragile or something sacred, with a precision that has nothing to do with the object itself and everything to do with the weight you feel in your hands when you're holding it. How many people know you have this? He said. The people who sent you that envelope tonight, Harlow said. They're not with me. I didn't send it. He let that settle. Someone else knows the files exist. I don't know how. I've been careful, but someone found out and they moved first, and whatever they want, it isn't what I want. And what do you want? Harlow looked at him directly for the first time since Vincent had walked in. I want it to end, he said. The files were your father's way of trying to make something right that he spent his whole life making wrong. I think you can do what he couldn't. I think that's why he left them for you. Vincent picked up the box. It was heavier than it looked. He was halfway to the door when his phone vibrated. He stopped, looked at the screen. A text from a number he didn't recognize. You picked up the box. That was the wrong choice. You have until 4 a.m. to put it back, or what happened to Petrov happens to the people you actually care about. Vincent read the text twice. Dmitry Petrov had been found in the river 8 days ago with 3 bullets in his chest and his hands removed at the wrist. He had been a mid-level liaison between the Russian networks and 2 of the 5 major families operating on the eastern seaboard. His death was still officially unsolved. Vincent looked back at Harlow. Get out of the city tonight, he said. Don't use your cards. Don't contact anyone you know. Go somewhere you've never been. Harlow nodded like he had already expected this conversation. Vincent walked back out into the cold, carrying his dead father's secrets in a cardboard box, and the city was completely silent around him, and somewhere inside the organization he had spent 6 years building, 2 men whose faces he knew and whose hands he had shaken, and whose loyalty he had never once doubted were already in the process of selling him to the people who wanted him dead, and the sun was not yet up, and everything was about to get much worse. Vincent didn't sleep. He sent his driver home at 3 a.m., carried the box up to the safe house on Meridian Street himself, a 3-room apartment above a dry cleaner that only 4 people in the organization knew existed, and sat down at the kitchen table under a bare overhead bulb and started reading. He read for 6 hours straight. By the time gray morning light began pushing through the edges of the curtains, Vincent Moretti understood that the man he had believed his father to be had never existed. Not exactly. The real Carlo Moretti was in these folders. Not a monster, not a saint, but something more complicated and harder to hold than either. A man who had made one catastrophic decision at 32 years old and then spent the next 3 decades being slowly consumed by the consequences of it. The story began in 1979. Carlo Moretti had been a legitimate businessman then, genuinely legitimate, which was the part that hit Vincent hardest. A financial partner in a mid-sized freight logistics company called Adler Crane Shipping, founded with 2 other men, a working-class kid from South Philadelphia who had educated himself into competence through sheer stubbornness and had built something real with his own hands. The earliest documents in the box were clean, corporate, unremarkable. Contracts, invoices, partnership agreements, the kind of paperwork that belonged in a filing cabinet in any ordinary American business office. Then came the letter dated March 1981. It was from a man named Gerald Foss, and it was not a business letter. It was a threat dressed in the language of a business letter, which made it worse. Foss represented an investment group. The documents made clear within a few pages that this investment group was a financial front for the Santoro crime family, one of the 3 dominant organizations operating in the Northeast at the time. The letter informed Carlo that Adler Crane Shipping was being brought into a new arrangement. Certain shipments would move through their infrastructure. Certain records would be kept in a particular way. In exchange, the company would receive protection, favorable port access, and a percentage of the revenue generated by these additional activities. Carlo had written back declining. The response had not been another letter. Vincent found the hospital records tucked into a folder marked simply March to April 1981. His mother, Elena Moretti, had been admitted to St. Anthony's Medical Center on March 28th with injuries consistent with an assault. She had been 29 years old. Vincent had not yet been born. The records were clinical, brief, and devastating in the particular way that clinical language is devastating when you understand what it is describing. Carlo had signed the arrangement 6 days after his wife was discharged from the hospital. Vincent sat with that for a long time. He got up, filled a glass of water from the tap, drank it standing at the sink, and stood there with both hands braced on the counter and his head down, breathing slowly, feeling the information move through him the way a physical impact moves through the body. First the shock, then the specific location of the pain, then the slow comprehension of the damage. His father had never told him. His mother had never told him. He had grown up in the shadow of the organization, had been groomed for it from the time he was old enough to understand what it was, had stepped into it willingly at 23 and built himself into something formidable inside it. And the entire foundation had been constructed on top of a moment of violence that had never been spoken about aloud in his presence a single time. He went back to the table and kept reading. What followed in the folders was the slow, documented collapse of a man who had been trapped and knew it, and responded to the trap not by surrendering, but by recording everything. From 1981 onward, Carlo had kept parallel books. The official records of the organization, presented to the captains and the families and the accountants on retainer, and then these, the real records, meticulous and complete, every illegal transaction documented with dates and amounts and names, and the names of the people who had given the orders. Year after year, folder after folder. Carlo had built the organization under duress, expanded it under duress, recruited men and formed alliances and accumulated power, and had written down every detail of every crime that power was built upon, and had kept those records in a place that no one inside the organization knew about, tended by a single private accountant named Elias Harlow, who had apparently been the only human being Carlo Moretti had fully trusted in the last 20 years of his life. Why? That was the question Vincent kept circling. Why document it? Why keep it? Why hand it eventually to the son? The answer came in the final folder, a personal document, not a financial record. Carlo's handwriting, dense and cramped across 15 pages, dated 2 months before his death. I have spent 30 years building something I never wanted and cannot dismantle without destroying everyone inside it, including Vincent. The men who work for this organization are not all bad men. Some of them are, but many of them are men who found themselves inside something larger than their own choices, the same way I did. And I cannot simply hand evidence to prosecutors without understanding what that evidence will do to every one of them and their families. I have tried to find a way out that doesn't leave bodies. I have not found it. Maybe Vincent can. He is harder than I was and smarter than I was, and I believe he understands. At some level, I was never able to articulate to him directly that the things we build in this life can become the things that bury us. I am giving him the tools to end this. I don't know if he will use them. I hope he is brave enough to. I was not. Vincent folded the pages and set them down and put both hands flat on the table and looked at the far wall for a while. Then his phone rang. It was Sal. Vincent picked up. "We have a problem," Sal said. "Tell me." "Caruso's people reached out again this morning. They're not asking for a sit-down anymore." A pause. "They're saying the meeting already happened, that an agreement's been reached. Vincent, they're saying it was authorized by you." The cold precision descended again. "Who told them that?" "They won't say, but they're moving on it. I'm hearing from 2 of our port contacts that Caruso crews were on our docks at 6 this morning, not confrontationally. They walked in like they already had permission." Vincent thought about the text from the night before. "You picked up the box. That was the wrong choice. Someone had been watching the depot, someone who knew about the files and had gotten to his captains first, not to destroy the files, but to use them as leverage, to dismantle the organization through a controlled handover to the Caruso family, which was a different kind of theft entirely. Not robbery. Acquisition. "Who's been in contact with the Carusos?" Vincent said. "I need names, Sal, not guesses." Another pause, longer this time. When Sal spoke again, his voice had a quality Vincent recognized, the sound of a man delivering news he would rather not deliver. The access logs on the port agreements were pulled twice in the last 3 weeks, from 2 terminals. One is registered to Danny Ricci. Danny Ricci, Vincent's logistics captain. 12 years in the organization, trusted with the port infrastructure that represented almost 40% of the operation's cash flow. A man Vincent had attended the baptism of 2 of his children. And the other terminal. Silence. "Sal, the other terminal is mine," Sal said. "But Vincent, I need you to listen to me. I pulled those logs because I was investigating the same thing you're asking about. I found the first access, Ricci's access, and I went in to see what he'd been looking at. I have the timestamps. I can show you." Vincent didn't respond immediately. He sat with the silence and turned the information over. Sal Dentini had been with him for 9 years. He was methodical, unsentimental, occasionally ruthless in the ways that the job required, and Vincent had never caught him in a lie. Not a significant one. But in this business, the people who were best at betrayal were the ones you never caught. And the explanation Sal was offering was exactly the explanation a man would offer if he were guilty and smart enough to have prepared for the question. "Come to the Meridian House," Vincent said. "Bring the timestamps. Bring your phone. Bring everything." "Vincent, if you're clean, you have nothing to be careful about. If you're not clean, I'll know in about 10 minutes of looking at what you bring me. Either way, come now." He hung up, sat for a moment, then called Marcus Hale. The lawyer picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice was the voice of a man who had been awake for hours, which meant he'd been thinking about the call Vincent had made the night before, which meant he was already preparing for whatever came next, which was why Vincent paid him the way he paid him. "I need to know something," Vincent said. "If a person were in possession of documented evidence of federal crimes, extensive evidence, years of it, and they wanted to understand their options before deciding what to do with it, how would that conversation begin?" A very long pause. "That would be a conversation protected by attorney-client privilege," Hale said carefully. "I know that." "And the person in possession of this evidence, are they a subject of those crimes, or are they a third party?" "They're a subject, but not the originator. They inherited the situation." Another pause. Hale was a careful man. Careful in the way that good lawyers are careful. Not timid, but precise. He chose his words with the attention of someone who understood that words in his profession were load-bearing structures. "That's a different conversation than the simple one," he said. "That involves cooperation frameworks, potential immunity structures, the question of what the evidence implicates directly versus tangentially. It's a complicated conversation that would take some time." "Can you have it today?" "If I need to." "You need to," Vincent said. "Don't contact me through normal channels. I'll reach out." He set the phone down and looked at the box of folders. 40 years of crimes, documented in his dead father's handwriting, sitting on a kitchen table above a dry cleaner on Meridian Street, while the organization they described was being carved up by men who had been eating at his table 6 months ago. Sal arrived 40 minutes later. He was alone, as instructed, and he looked like a man who had not slept and was managing his fear with the specific discipline of someone who understood that showing fear in rooms like this one was its own kind of confession. He sat across from Vincent at the kitchen table and laid out his phone and a printed set of access logs and said nothing, just let the documents speak. Vincent went through them carefully. The timestamps were there. Ricci's access at 11:23 p.m. on a Tuesday, pulling the port infrastructure files, routing documents, shipment manifests, access credentials. Then Sal's access 2 days later at 8:45 a.m., pulling the same files, and then the access log itself, which was consistent with someone investigating an intrusion rather than committing one. It was consistent. That was the problem. Consistency was not the same as innocence, and evidence that fit a story could be made to fit a story. Tell me about Ricci, Vincent said. Sal exhaled. He's been off for about 6 weeks. Small things. Slow to return calls. Missed a Thursday meeting, said his kid was sick. I didn't flag it because Danny's been solid for 12 years and one bad month didn't feel like... He stopped. Didn't feel like what? Didn't feel like what it looks like now. Sal looked at the table. His brother-in-law works for Caruso. I knew that when we brought Danny in. It was vetted, it was cleared, it was considered manageable given the separation between their operations. If someone wanted a channel into Caruso without it being visible, Danny's brother-in-law is... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Vincent stood up and went to the window. 3 floors below, the dry cleaner was opening for the day. A woman was unlocking the front door, flipping the sign. Ordinary Tuesday morning. City moving the way cities move, indifferent and continuous. There are people in this organization right now who have made arrangements with the Caruso family, Vincent said. He didn't turn around. Those arrangements are being presented to the Carusos as authorized. Whoever is doing this is doing it fast, which means they expect me to find out, and they want it far enough along by the time I do that, it can't be cleanly stopped. He paused. That's not just a betrayal, Sal. That's a dissolution. Someone isn't trying to take over this organization. They're trying to end it, on their terms, through a controlled handover, and position themselves on the other side of the handover as a Caruso asset. Sal was quiet for a moment. If that's true, they need the port infrastructure to make it work. The money flows through the ports. Without the port access and routing infrastructure, the handover doesn't have enough value to make it worth Caruso's while. So the ports are the lever, Vincent said. The ports are everything right now. Vincent turned from the window. He looked at Sal for a long moment. Sal held his gaze, which either meant he was innocent or he was a significantly better actor than Vincent had ever given him credit for. I'm going to ask you something, and I need the true answer, not the safe answer. Ask. Is there anything you've done in the last 60 days that you haven't told me about? Any contact, any conversation, any agreement, anything you made a decision about that you intended to tell me later or thought you could handle without bringing to me? Sal didn't look away. 3 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a man named Torello. He approached me at the Villanova Club. You know the place, we've both been there. He said he represented a group of investors interested in acquiring legitimate port-adjacent businesses. I told him I wasn't authorized to discuss anything and walked away. I didn't tell you because it felt like a fishing expedition by someone low-level, and I didn't think it warranted your attention. He paused. I'm telling you now because I think Torello is Caruso adjacent, and I think that conversation was them taking a read on how accessible your inner circle was. Vincent looked at him for another long moment. Then he sat back down at the table. Torello's a Caruso soldier, mid-level. They sent him to take your temperature. He thought about the timeline. 3 weeks ago. Which meant Caruso had been planning this for at least 3 weeks, which meant the arrangement with the captains inside the organization had started before that, which meant this had been in motion for a month or more, while Vincent had been running the organization with no visibility into any of it. The organization he had spent 6 years building. The organization his father had spent 30 years trapped inside. He looked at the box of folders. There's something else, he said. Something I need to tell you, and then I need you to help me think through what it means. He told Sal about Elias Harlow, about the depot, about the files. Not everything. Not his father's letter, not the hospital records, but the structural facts, the existence of the documentation, the 40 years of recorded crimes, what those records, in the wrong hands, could do to the organization and what they could do in the right ones. When he finished, Sal was quiet for a long time. The people who sent that envelope, Sal said finally, the ones who knew about the files before Harlow contacted you, they knew about the meeting at the depot. They were watching it. Which means they've known about the files for long enough to have surveilled Harlow, identified the depot as a probable meeting point, and gotten that information into a position to use as pressure. Sal's jaw tightened. That's not a captain. That's not Danny Ricci with a grudge and a brother-in-law with connections. That's a coordinated operation. Yes. Which means there's someone above Caruso in this. Someone with the reach to run surveillance on a private accountant and intercept information about documents that a dead man kept hidden for 6 years. Sal looked at Vincent. That's federal. The word landed in the room like a stone into still water. Or someone who has federal resources, Vincent said. Or someone who has cultivated a federal relationship for long enough that the line between them has gotten blurry. He picked up his father's last letter from the table and held it for a moment without opening it. My father spent 30 years looking for a way to end this that didn't leave bodies. He couldn't find it. He set the letter down. I need to find it in about 48 hours. Sal looked at the letter, at the box, at Vincent. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Vincent said slowly, that the people trying to use those files to take apart this organization have already made a mistake. They assumed the files were leverage. They assumed whoever had them would want to keep them hidden. He paused. They didn't consider the possibility that I might want to use them for the same reason my father kept them. Sal stared at him. Vincent. Not a word, Vincent said. Not yet. Not to anyone. I need a day to read the rest of this, and I need you to do something for me that has to be invisible. What? Find Ricci. Don't approach him. Don't let him know he's been made. Just find him and watch him and tell me who he talks to and where he goes. Vincent looked at the folders. And find out who else in this organization has been in contact with anyone outside it in the last 60 days. Anyone at all. I want the full picture before I move. Sal stood up, tucked his phone back into his jacket. He looked at Vincent the way men look at other men when they are trying to decide whether they are watching something admirable or something that is about to get everyone killed. You know that whatever you're thinking about doing, he said, there's no version of it that ends with you keeping the organization. I know, Vincent said. The answer came too quickly and too calmly, and it stopped Sal cold in the doorway. He turned around and looked at Vincent for a moment longer. Then he nodded once, slowly, and left. Vincent sat alone in the kitchen with his father's life spread across the table in front of him, and from somewhere in the building below, the smell of cleaning chemicals drifted up through the floorboards. And outside the window, the city continued its ordinary Tuesday. And inside Vincent Moretti's chest, something was resolving into a shape he didn't have a name for yet. Not quite peace, not quite grief. Something harder and more deliberate than either. And by the time Sal had reached the bottom of the stairs, Vincent had already picked up the next folder and begun to read. He didn't look up for another 4 hours. And when he finally did, when he closed the last folder and sat back in the chair and stared at the ceiling with the full weight of 40 years pressing down through the cardboard box and into the table and into the floor beneath it, he knew two things with the particular certainty that comes not from reasoning, but from the place below reasoning where a man's actual decisions are made. He knew what his father had needed him to find, and he knew what he was going to do. What he did not know, what he could not have known, sitting in that kitchen above that dry cleaner on that ordinary Tuesday morning, was that Danny Ricci had made a phone call 40 minutes ago, and the man on the other end of that call was not a Caruso soldier, and was not a federal agent, and was not anyone Vincent had ever considered a threat, and was someone whose name, when Sal finally delivered it to Vincent the following morning, would change the shape of everything Vincent thought he understood about who was actually orchestrating the collapse of his empire and why. Sal's message arrived at 6:14 the following morning. Not a call. A text. 4 words. You need to see this. Vincent had slept 3 hours on the safe house couch with his jacket still on and his phone on the cushion beside his face, the way soldiers sleep and the way men sleep when they know the night isn't finished with them yet. He was awake before the buzzing stopped. He read the 4 words, sat up, and felt the particular quality of dread that comes not from fear of the unknown, but from the certainty that what you are about to learn is going to be worse than what you have already accepted. He called back. Talk. Not on the phone. Sal's voice was controlled in the way it got controlled when something had broken past his usual threshold. Come to the warehouse on Delaney, the back entrance. Come now, and come alone. Vincent was moving before the call ended. The warehouse on Delaney was a legitimate storage facility. Textiles, import furniture, container goods rotating through a distribution chain that was clean on paper and had stayed clean for 7 years because Vincent had kept it clean intentionally. A buffer between the operational side of the organization and the legitimate infrastructure that made the operational side possible. He arrived at 6:41 a.m. The street was quiet. A produce truck was unloading 2 blocks down, early morning pigeons working the sidewalk. He went around to the back entrance, which Sal had left unlocked, and pushed through into the loading dock interior. Sal was there, and Danny Ricci was there. Ricci was seated on a metal folding chair in the middle of the loading dock floor, his wrists zip-tied behind the chair back, his head down. He'd been hit at least twice. There was dried blood above his left eyebrow, and his lip was split and swollen. He was conscious. When Vincent walked in, Ricci raised his head and looked at him, and the expression on his face was not defiance and was not fear, but something that looked uncomfortably like relief. Vincent looked at Sal. How? He came to me, Sal said, 2 hours ago, on his own. He said he needed to talk to you before it was too late. He paused. I didn't do this to him. He showed up like this. Vincent pulled a second folding chair from against the wall, set it in front of Ricci, and sat down. He looked at Ricci for a long moment. Ricci's breathing was shallow and effortful. Up close, the damage was worse than it had looked from across the room. Whoever had hit him had done it with intent, not anger. Who did this? Vincent said. Doesn't matter, Ricci said. His voice was thick. Vincent, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not say anything until I'm finished, because if you stop me, I don't think I'll be able to start again. Vincent said nothing, which was its own kind of permission. Ricci exhaled slowly. I've been feeding information to the Caruso family, port routing, access credentials, shipment schedules, for 9 weeks. He said it flat and direct, without preamble or deflection, the way a man confesses when he has already moved past the point where the confession can hurt him as much as whatever came before it. My brother-in-law was the conduit. I want you to know he didn't come to me. They went to him, and they used him to get to me, and the way they got to me was... He stopped, swallowed. They have my daughter, Vincent. The loading dock was very quiet. Explain that to me, Vincent said. Sophia. She's 23. She lives in Portland. She's been out of my life, out of this life, for 5 years. She wanted nothing to do with any of it, and I respected that. I was glad she was out. Ricci's jaw tightened. 9 weeks ago, she disappeared. Her roommate filed a missing persons report. I got a phone call the same night, a voice I didn't recognize. They told me she was safe and she would stay safe as long as I cooperated. And if I went to you or to anyone in the organization, they'd know within 24 hours and Sophia would be... He stopped again. Vincent watched him, watched the specific quality of grief that moves through a man's face when he describes the thing that broke him. It was not performance. He had seen enough of both to know. What did they want from you specifically, Vincent said. The port infrastructure documentation first, then the access to the routing system. Then 3 weeks ago, they wanted something different. They wanted me to get into the financial archive, the long-term records, going back to the original organization structure. Ricci looked at him. They were looking for something specific, something in your father's records. There it was. Vincent kept his face still. Did you find it? I found where it should have been. The partition in the archive where the historical files were indexed, but the actual files weren't there. The index pointed to a location that came back empty. He paused. I reported that back to them, and they went quiet for 4 days. Then the voice called again and told me my window of usefulness was closing, and that I needed to provide something of value within 48 hours, or our arrangement would be reconsidered. His eyes were steady on Vincent's. I think they knew the files had been moved. I think they knew you had them. Vincent stood up from the chair. He walked to the far wall and stood with his back to Ricci and Sal for a moment, processing. The files. It kept coming back to the files. Whoever was behind this, not Caruso. Caruso was a vehicle, a mechanism being used by someone else. They had known about Carlo's documentation for long enough to have built an entire operation around acquiring it. They had inserted Ricci as an asset. They had orchestrated the Caruso negotiation as a parallel pressure track. They had sent the anonymous envelope to the depot to flush Vincent into movement so they could monitor what he did. Every piece of this had been constructed around a single objective, getting those files before Vincent understood what they were. He turned back around. The voice on the phone, anything distinctive, accent, cadence, anything. No accent, educated. Careful, never said anything that could be a name or an identifier. Ricci hesitated. One thing, the first call at the very beginning, there was background noise, brief, before they moved somewhere quieter. It sounded like an office, phones ringing, the kind of ambient sound you get in a large, open-floor workspace. He looked at Vincent. Not a criminal organization's workspace. Something else. An open-floor office. Phones. Who beat you? Vincent said. And when? Last night. Late. I was at my apartment. 2 men came in whilst they had a key, which means someone gave them a key or they'd been in before and copied it. They didn't say anything. They hit me until I... He paused. Reorganized. Until I gave them the name Elias Harlow. The silence in the loading dock had a specific weight to it now. I'm sorry, Ricci said. The words were not adequate, and he knew it, and he said them anyway. I'm sorry, Vincent. I had nothing left to give them that was worth more than my daughter's life, and Harlow's name was something I'd pulled from the archive index. I didn't know who he was. I still don't fully. But they did. The way they reacted when I said it, they already knew the name. They went still in a way that told me they'd just gotten confirmation of something they'd been trying to confirm. Vincent thought about the call to Harlow 3 nights ago. Get out of the city tonight. Don't use your cards. He hoped Harlow had listened. He suspected with the cold weight of probability that Harlow had not been fast enough. He looked at Sal. Find out where Harlow is. Right now. Sal was already on his phone. He made 2 calls in quick succession, speaking quietly, and after the second call, he lowered the phone and looked at Vincent with an expression that confirmed what Vincent had already accepted. He's dead, Sal said. Found this morning. His apartment in the Garfield district. They're calling it a home invasion. Vincent stood very still. Elias Harlow. 50-something, narrow-faced, too thin coat, standing in a freight depot in the middle of the night because he had spent 6 years honoring a promise to a dead man. He had carried Carlo Moretti's secret for 6 years and had delivered it and had been dead within 72 hours of doing so. And Vincent had told him to run, and he had either not run fast enough or had trusted that one night's head start was sufficient, and it had not been. Something moved through Vincent's chest. Not guilt. Guilt was too soft a word for it. Something with more structure, more permanence, the specific kind of weight that settles in permanently rather than passing through. Cut him loose, Vincent said, gesturing at Ricci. Sal cut the zip ties. Ricci brought his arms forward slowly, wincing, rubbing his wrists. Your daughter, Vincent said. Do you have any location, any information at all about where she's being held? Nothing concrete. I've been trying to trace. I have a contact who does this kind of work, locating people, and I gave him everything I had, which wasn't much. Ricci stood up carefully, testing his balance. Vincent, whoever these people are, they're not operating like an organized crime family. The discipline, the information security, the way they built this operation with layers, this is something else. I know, Vincent said. How long have you known that? Ricci looked at him. About 4 weeks in, when I realized they knew things about the organization that weren't in any of the files I'd given them. Things that would take either years of deep surveillance or a source much higher than me. He hesitated. I thought about telling you. Every single day I thought about it. But they were so fast with information. Every time I had a thought about making contact with you, within a day or 2 they'd call with something that made it clear they were watching. I couldn't find the gap. Vincent picked up his jacket from the chair. He thought about his father. About 30 years of the same impossible arithmetic. The cost of acting against the threat weighed against the cost of what the threat would do to the people he couldn't protect if he failed. He thought about how Carlo had resolved that arithmetic. By documenting everything and dying without making the choice. He was not going to die without making the choice. Stay here, he told Ricci. Don't contact anyone. Don't use your phone. He looked at Sal. I need an hour. Then I need a meeting with Marcus Hale, and I need it off the books. No trail. What are you going to tell him? Everything, Vincent said. All of it. He left the warehouse and sat in his car in the alley behind it for 4 minutes, not moving, hands on the wheel, staring at the brick wall in front of him. Then he called Marcus Hale. Hale answered immediately. "I've been waiting," he said, which meant he had spent the night preparing for this conversation and had understood from the night before that it was coming. "I need to come in," Vincent said. "Today. Now. And I need you to have already reached out to someone who can structure an immunity framework, because what I'm bringing is not going to be a simple conversation." A pause. "How extensive is this material?" 40 years, 3 families, federal crimes at every level. He paused. "Including RICO predicate acts that go back far enough to implicate infrastructure that is still active." A longer pause. "Vincent, if this is what you're describing, the federal interest is going to be significant. The conversation I have to structure before you walk into a room like that is not a short one." "I know, but there's a variable." He thought about Sophia Ricci, about Elias Harlow in his too-thin coat. Someone on the other side of this already has federal-level access, possibly federal-level assets, which means the people I'm going to be talking to may already have information about what I'm bringing from a source I can't identify. I need you to think about how to structure this so that the evidence itself is what matters, not the negotiation around it. Hale was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted, less cautious, more concentrated. "There's a prosecutor, Northern District. She's been building a RICO case for about 4 years, targeting the Eastern Seaboard families. She's clean. I know her professionally, and she is genuinely clean, which in this context is important. Her name is Adrienne Cole." Vincent had heard the name, not in detail, not with any alarm, because the investigation had stayed far enough from the organization's center that it hadn't registered as an immediate concern. He considered the irony of that. "Set up a meeting," he said. "Today." "Vincent, today, Marcus." He hung up. Started the car, drove 4 blocks before his phone buzzed with a call from a number he didn't recognize. A different unknown number than the one that had texted him at the depot. Different format, different area code. He answered, "Mr. Moretti?" The voice was exactly as Ricci had described it. No accent, educated, careful. The voice of someone who had spent years learning to be neutral. "You've been busy." Vincent said nothing. Let the silence run. "The files your father left are a significant problem," the voice said. "Not for the reasons you may think. There are names in those files that extend well beyond organized crime. Names connected to political infrastructure, financial regulatory bodies, federal agencies. People who have spent considerable resources ensuring that those names remain unassociated with Carlo Moretti's records." A pause. "We're not interested in destroying you, Mr. Moretti. We're interested in the files. Hand them over in their entirety, and we will extract ourselves from your organization and your life. Your operation continues. Your people are safe. The situation with the Caruso family resolves." "And Harlow," Vincent said. A beat of silence. "An unfortunate escalation. That wasn't authorized. Someone's doing unauthorized killing on your behalf, and you're calling to negotiate. That's not a strong position." "It's stronger than yours," the voice said. "You have a meeting with Marcus Hale scheduled in approximately 90 minutes. I'd encourage you to reconsider its purpose before you walk into that office." Vincent's jaw tightened. They were monitoring Hale's communications, which meant they had either penetrated Hale's office directly or they had a tap on a line between them, which meant the call he had just made to Hale from his car had been heard in real time, and this call was the response. "Here is what's going to happen," the voice continued. "You're going to cancel the meeting with Hale. You're going to have the files delivered to an address I provide before 6 p.m. today. And then this is over for you. Your empire stays intact. You have my word." "Your word," Vincent said. "It's more than you think. Tell me your name." A pause. "That's not part of this conversation." "Then we don't have a conversation." Vincent made his voice flat. Absolute. The voice his father had taught him to use when a negotiation was over. "You can't give me your word without giving me your name, and if you won't give me your name, then your word is air and your offer is nothing, which means I walk into Marcus Hale's office in 90 minutes and I give him everything, and the names in those files go into a federal evidence package, and whoever they belong to deals with it the same way everyone else deals with a federal investigation." He paused. "So, your name." The silence lasted 11 seconds. Vincent counted. Weston, the voice said. Raymond Weston. And the bottom fell out of Vincent Moretti's world. Raymond Weston had been a fixture in the city's financial and political landscape for 15 years. A private equity investor and civic figure, known for his philanthropic work, his connections to 3 consecutive mayoral administrations, and his carefully maintained reputation as one of the city's most respected establishment figures. He sat on the boards of 2 major hospitals and a university endowment. His name appeared regularly in the business section of the city's newspapers in the context of urban development, job creation, charitable foundations. He was also, Vincent now understood, the name at the top of the folder marked 1987 in Carlo's records, the year the Moretti organization had entered into a financial arrangement with a then-young investment manager who had needed a mechanism for laundering capital from the Santoro family's construction rackets through a series of legitimate real estate vehicles. The arrangement had lasted 4 years and had generated returns that had seeded Weston's legitimate investment career. His entire fortune, every hospital board seat, every charitable foundation, every newspaper profile, had been built on a foundation that Carlo Moretti had documented in precise detail, and Weston had spent 35 years being certain no one would ever find. The files didn't just implicate crime families, they implicated Raymond Weston. And Raymond Weston, with his political connections and his access and his 15 years of establishment positioning, had done what men like him do when their foundations crack. He had built a machine to eliminate the threat before it could surface. The captains, Caruso, the surveillance, Harlow, all of it had been Weston, not organized crime dismantling an organization from inside. A legitimate man, a respected man, running a covert operation to bury the evidence of who he had been before he became respectable. Vincent sat in his parked car on a side street 3 blocks from the Delaney warehouse and held his phone against his ear and felt the full architecture of what he was dealing with settle into place with the grinding precision of something very large and very heavy locking into position. "You were in the files," Vincent said. Weston's silence confirmed it more completely than any words would have. "You've known about those files for how long?" "Long enough," Weston said. The careful neutrality in his voice had developed a hairline fracture. "Not much. Just enough." "Carlo knew you were watching for them," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. He was reconstructing in real time, pulling threads. That's why he kept them with Harlow instead of inside the organization. He knew if anyone found out the files existed, the threat would come from outside, not inside. He was protecting the files from you specifically. "Your father was a cautious man." "He was a trapped man," Vincent said. "You helped trap him." The cold precision was still there, but underneath it something else was moving now. Not rage, exactly, but its structural equivalent, the thing that rage becomes when it has nowhere to go and so converts itself into absolute resolve instead. "You put my mother in the hospital." A silence so complete it had texture. "That was Gerald Foss," Weston said. "Foss worked for the Santoros, not for me." "You introduced Foss to the Santoros. It's in the 1980 folder. The meeting at the Aldrin Club. You brokered that connection." Vincent's voice was very quiet. "You were 28 years old, and you were building a career, and you needed capital, and you didn't care where it came from or what it did to the people it moved through. My father was one of those people. My mother was one of those people. And now you're calling me on a phone that you're monitoring through infrastructure you built specifically to protect yourself from the consequences of what you did in 1981. And you're offering me a deal." "I'm offering you survival," Weston said. The hairline fracture was wider now. "The alternative is that I make a single call, and the evidence I have connecting you personally to 12 federal crimes gets delivered to Adrienne Cole's office before you can walk in the door. Your own immunity conversation becomes irrelevant. You go in as a defendant, not a cooperating witness." There it was. The real leverage. Not Caruso. Not the captains. Weston had spent enough time building this that he had accumulated enough on Vincent himself to neutralize the files as a weapon. Hand over Carlo's records and the organization continues, but Weston is protected. Refuse and Vincent is indicted on Weston's timeline before he can use the files as leverage. A perfect trap, built over years by a careful, intelligent, utterly ruthless man who understood that the best prison was one the occupant didn't know they were in, just like the one Carlo had spent 30 years inside. "I'll need some time to consider," Vincent said. "You have until 6 p.m., Weston said. "After that, things move in a direction that benefits neither of us." The call ended. Vincent sat for a moment. Then he did something he had not done in a very long time. He pressed both hands against his face and held them there in the close dark and breathed 4 counts in, 4 counts out, feeling the pressure of his own palms against his eyes, grounding himself in the purely physical because the purely physical was the only thing he could trust right now. Then he lowered his hands, started the car, and drove. Not to Hale's office, not to the safe house. He drove to a parking structure 4 blocks from his old neighborhood, the neighborhood where he had grown up, where his father had walked him to school, where his mother had planted tomatoes in a window box on the 2nd floor of a red brick row house that no longer existed, replaced by a glass front condo building that had arrived with the development wave of the early 2000s. He parked on the 3rd level and got out and stood at the open edge looking out over the rooftops and thought about all of it. Raymond Weston had 12 pieces of evidence against Vincent personally. Maybe more. Weston had been building this for months, possibly years. And if he had the reach and the access that this operation demonstrated, the evidence would be real and it would be prosecutable and it would land. Adrienne Cole was building a RICO case that had been running 4 years. The files Carlo left would accelerate it from years to months. But if Weston delivered his evidence package first, Vincent walked into Cole's office as a target, not an asset, and whatever cooperation framework Hale tried to build collapsed before it started. The window was not 90 minutes anymore. The window was the gap between right now and whenever Weston decided Vincent's silence meant refusal. And inside that window, Vincent had to find a way to use the files that didn't require the negotiating position he no longer had, get Ricci's daughter back from people who had demonstrated they were willing to commit murder without authorization, and do it all while the 2 people in his organization who were Weston's assets, still unidentified, possibly more than 2, continued to operate inside his structure with access to his communications. He pulled out his phone, called a number he had memorized years ago and never used. It rang 4 times before a woman answered. "Adrienne Cole." Vincent closed his eyes for 1 second. "My name is Vincent Moretti," he said. "I don't have a lawyer present, and I'm not recording this call. I need you to listen to me for 60 seconds without responding, and then I need you to tell me if you want to continue this conversation in person." A pause. Then, in a voice that was professional and alert and held a quality of very focused attention. "Go ahead. I have 40 years of documented evidence covering 3 major organized crime families operating in the northeastern United States. I have financial records, transaction logs, personnel records, and personal documentation by the principal organizer covering crimes including money laundering, extortion, bribery of public officials, conspiracy, and homicide. The documentation is original, contemporaneous, and corroborated by external records that can be independently verified." He paused. "I also have documentation implicating a private citizen with no organized crime affiliation who has spent 35 years using political and financial influence to suppress this evidence and who is currently conducting an active criminal operation to destroy it. This individual has committed homicide in the last 72 hours in furtherance of that suppression effort." Silence on the line. Very focused silence. "I will deliver all of this to you personally," Vincent said. "If we can structure an arrangement that accounts for my cooperation value and the extraordinary circumstances that produce the evidence. I need that conversation to happen in the next 4 hours. After that, the individual I mentioned will move against me, and the evidence becomes significantly harder to deliver intact." A pause that lasted exactly 7 seconds. "I know who you are, Mr. Moretti," Cole said, "and I want you to understand that this conversation is now documented on my end." "I understand." "Then come in," she said. "Bring your lawyer. Come now." Vincent looked out over the rooftops. The city below him, indifferent and continuous, doing what cities do. He thought about his father sitting in this same city 40 years ago, signing a piece of paper with shaking hands because the alternative was worse, choosing the trap because at least inside the trap, his family survived for another day. He thought about the 15 pages in Carlo's handwriting. Maybe Vincent can. He is harder than I was and smarter than I was. He had 4 hours. He called Sal. Get Ricci somewhere safe, full lockdown, no phones, no contact with anyone. Do it now, and don't tell me where until I ask. Then he called Hale. Change your plans. Meet me at Cole's office. Northern District Federal Building. Yes, that Cole. Yes, right now. I'll explain everything when we're in the room. He got back in the car. The files were still in the safe house on Meridian Street. He drove there first, loaded the box into the trunk, and then drove toward the Federal Building on 5th Street with his dead father's evidence of his own crimes sitting behind him, and Raymond Weston's clock running somewhere above the city, and the specific knowledge that the next thing he was about to do was going to cost him everything he had spent his adult life building, and was the only thing left that his father had ever truly asked of him. The Federal Building on 5th Street had the particular quality of institutional silence that Vincent had always associated with places designed to process consequences. The marble lobby, the security checkpoint, the fluorescent lighting that flattened everything it touched into the same gray uniformity. He had walked past this building hundreds of times over 20 years. He had never walked through the front door. He walked through it at 9:47 a.m., carrying a cardboard box. Marcus Hale was already in the lobby, standing near the security desk with his briefcase and the expression of a man who had been a criminal defense attorney for 30 years, and had therefore stopped being surprised by anything, but was reserving judgment on this particular development until he had more information. He looked at Vincent. He looked at the box. He said nothing until they were through security and in the elevator. How bad? Hale said. Define bad. How bad is what's in that box for you personally? Vincent looked at the elevator doors. Bad enough that I couldn't walk in here as a witness without you already being present. Hale absorbed this. And the other side of it, the cooperation value. Sufficient, Vincent said. More than sufficient. The elevator opened on the 7th floor. A young assistant was waiting to walk them to a conference room. Glass walls, a long table, a city view that, on another day, might have been worth noting. Adrienne Cole was already there. She was younger than Vincent had expected, mid-40s, with the focused and slightly compressed quality of someone who had spent years in a profession that rewarded precision over expansiveness. She was standing when they came in. She did not extend her hand. Mr. Moretti, she said. Mr. Hale. She looked at the box. Sit down. They sat. Cole sat across from them. She had a legal pad and a pen and a recorder on the table, which she pointed to. This conversation is being recorded. You're aware of that? Yes, Vincent said. Your client came to me directly before consulting you, Cole said to Hale. I want that on record as voluntary initial contact. Noted, Hale said, with a quality in his voice that conveyed he had thoughts about that sequence of events that he would be sharing with Vincent later, in private, at significant length. Before we discuss the contents of what you've brought, Cole said, looking at Vincent, I need you to understand the structure of this conversation. Nothing said here constitutes immunity or a cooperation agreement. Those require a process that takes more time than you've indicated we have. What this is, right now, is a proffer session. You tell me what you have, I evaluate its value, and if there's a basis for a formal agreement, we begin that process. If at any point your attorney advises you to stop, you stop. Clear? Clear, Vincent said. Then tell me what's in the box. Vincent told her. He took 40 minutes, and he told her everything in the order that he had learned it. The envelope, Harlow, the depot, the folders, Ricci, Weston. He was precise, and he was complete, and he did not editorialize, and he did not omit. Hale interrupted twice, briefly, to reframe specific statements in legally useful directions, and Vincent incorporated the reframes without resistance because Hale was right, and because the point was not to protect himself from the truth, but to present the truth in a form that could be used. When he finished, Cole had filled 6 pages of her legal pad and had stopped writing and was looking at him with the concentrated attention of someone who has just heard something that is reorganizing their understanding of a situation they thought they already understood. Raymond Weston, she said. Yes. You have documentation in those files directly implicating Weston in financial crimes dating to 1980. 1980 through 1984, specific transactions, amounts, the names of the Santoro family members involved, the structure of the laundering vehicles. Vincent paused. And a personal letter from my father, written 2 months before his death, describing the coercive circumstances under which the original arrangement was made. Cole set her pen down, picked it up again. The current operation Weston is running, the surveillance, the asset handling inside your organization, the homicide of Elias Harlow, you have no direct documentation of that. What you have is Ricci's account, which is a single witness, and the phone call this morning, which was on an unrecorded line. The phone call was from a number, Vincent said. I have it. Weston was monitoring Hale's office communications. The fact that he called me within minutes of my call to Hale is something your technical resources can probably work with faster than his people can cover. Cole looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up, said, "Excuse me," and left the conference room. Through the glass walls, Vincent watched her walk rapidly down the corridor and turn into an office, where she spoke to 2 people who were immediately in motion. Hale leaned toward Vincent and spoke quietly and quickly. "You understand what you're doing." "Yes." "The organization." "I know, Marcus." "Your people, the ones who are loyal, they go down with the structure when the structure comes down." Vincent looked at the table. "The loyal ones are the ones I'm trying to keep from getting killed by Weston's operation. The structure was going to come down anyway. That was Weston's plan. At least this way I control the terms." Hale sat back. He looked at the box. "Your father kept these for 30 years. He kept them so someone could use them. He just couldn't be the one to do it." Vincent looked up. "I can be." Cole came back into the room. She sat down. Her posture had changed slightly. A degree of acceleration in her movements that hadn't been there before. "The number you have for Weston," she said. "We can move on that quickly. I've also just learned something that changes the timeline of this conversation significantly." She paused. Raymond Weston placed a call to the U.S. Attorney's Office 40 minutes ago. He was providing information, purportedly evidence, regarding criminal activity connected to your organization. He named you specifically. The room temperature didn't change, but Vincent felt it drop anyway. "He moved early," Vincent said. "By about 20 minutes, Cole said, "which means you came in the door before his call was fully processed, which means your voluntary contact is on record before his submission. That sequence matters legally." She looked at him directly. "But it also means Weston knows you're here, or suspects it. And if he has the operational infrastructure you've described, he may have assets positioned to respond to that." Vincent's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. A text from Sal, 2 words. "They're moving." He showed it to Cole. "I have a man and a witness in a secured location. If Weston's people are moving, that location may be compromised." "Where?" "I don't know exactly. My man chose it specifically, so I wouldn't know until I asked." He picked up the phone and called Sal. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Same result? The specific quality of dread that comes from unanswered phones when things are already in motion moved through Vincent's chest like cold water. "I need to go," he said to Cole. "Mr. Moretti, the witness in that location is Danny Ricci, who is the only person with direct experiential knowledge of Weston's operational structure inside my organization. If Weston's people reach him before you have a statement on record, he is not going to survive that contact." He was already standing. "I will come back. I am not running. I am telling you that there is a man whose daughter is being held by the people I just described to you, and if he dies, whatever leverage we have over Weston's current operation dies with him. I need 2 hours." Cole looked at him for a moment that felt much longer than it was. "I'm going to make a call," she said, "to the organized crime unit. There will be federal vehicles moving within 15 minutes. You're going to take one of my people with you." "Fine." "And Mr. Moretti." Her voice was even and precise and held something in it that was not sympathy exactly, but was its more useful cousin, the recognition of a human situation that existed alongside the legal one. "Don't do anything in the next 2 hours that makes the conversation we just had irrelevant." He looked at her. "I've been doing things that made my life harder for 30 years, he said. I'm trying something different. He left the conference room with a federal agent named Torres, compact, quiet, watchful, and took the elevator down and went out to the street where his car was parked half a block away and got in and tried Sal again. Nothing. Then he tried an alternate number, a prepaid line that Sal kept for situations that required no record. It rang 3 times. Sal answered. His voice was tight and compressed in the way voices get when the speaker is moving fast and trying not to make noise. "Where are you?" Vincent said. "Moved them an hour ago." "I had a feeling—" A pause. The sound of a door. "I'm at the secondary. Ricci and I were at the Pontiac Street place. But Vincent, there are 2 cars on the block. They were here when we arrived. They didn't follow us, which means someone told them where the secondary was." Someone in the organization. Still feeding information. The secondary safe house location was known to 4 people, Vincent, Sal, and 2 senior captains, one of whom was still unidentified as Weston's asset. "Hold your position," Vincent said. "I have a federal agent with me. We're 12 minutes out." "Ricci's girlson," Sal said. "He got a call 20 minutes ago, from her. She's alive and she gave him a location before the line went dead. Something about a storage facility, Harwick Road. She said the name Harwick before they cut it." Harwick Road. Vincent knew it. A commercial strip on the eastern edge of the city, storage facilities and light industrial, the kind of area that absorbed activity without noticing it. He relayed this to Torres, who was already on his radio, voice low and rapid. Vincent drove. The city moved past the windows at a different rate than it normally did. The way it moved when the stakes were absolute and the brain accelerated its processing to match them, making everything both faster and more granular at once. 8 minutes. He heard Torres's radio crackling with responses. Units mobilizing toward Harwick Road, units toward Pontiac Street. The machinery of federal response, ponderous in planning and very fast in execution once it engaged. 6 minutes from Pontiac Street, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number, different from Weston's earlier number. He answered. "You made your choice." Weston's voice, on a new line, all the careful neutrality gone now. What was underneath it was not rage. It was colder than rage. The voice of a man who had spent 35 years managing threats to his position and had just watched one escape his management. "I want you to understand what that choice costs. Tell me." "The files implicate me in financial crimes that carry a maximum of 12 years. My attorneys will have me out in 4, possibly less, given my cooperation value regarding matters that dwarf your father's records." He paused. "But the evidence I provided this morning to the U.S. Attorney's Office implicates you in crimes that carry significantly longer. And unlike me, you don't have 35 years of civic reputation and institutional relationships to modulate a jury's perception." "You're calling to tell me I'm going to prison," Vincent said. "I already knew that." A pause. It was brief, but it was real. A half-second of recalibration that told Vincent the response had not been what Weston had prepared for. "You don't seem to understand the position you're in," Weston said. "I understand it exactly," Vincent said. "I've been in it my whole life, so was my father. The difference is, I know how it ends, and I've decided the ending is worth the cost." He paused. "You had Elias Harlow killed. That's a homicide charge on top of everything else. The financial crimes from the 1980s are historical. Your lawyers can work with historical. An active homicide connected to an ongoing suppression operation is different. That's not 4 years." Silence. "Here's what's going to happen, Weston. Federal units are moving toward Harwick Road right now. The woman being held there is going to be found and released, and her account of her captivity is going to be added to the evidence package. Your operational infrastructure, the people you used, the communications you ran, the financing behind it, is going to be pulled apart by people who are very good at pulling things apart. Whatever deal your attorneys negotiated this morning becomes significantly less useful as each piece of that infrastructure gets documented." Vincent's voice was flat and final. "You built something to bury what my father recorded. You should have left it buried and hoped I never found it. You came at me and you brought attention to something that had been sitting in a box for 6 years, and now it's in a federal building on 5th Street, and it is not going back into the box." The line went dead. Vincent drove. Pontiac Street was a narrow residential block that backed up against a commercial strip, the kind of street that existed in the margins between neighborhoods. Not quite one thing, not quite another. He turned onto it and saw immediately what Sal had described. Two cars parked on opposite sides of the block, positioned with the specific geometry of surveillance rather than ordinary parking, both occupied. Two men in the nearer vehicle, visible through the windshield. Torres had the radio to his ear. "Units are 2 minutes behind us," he said. "You should wait." "Sal's in there," Vincent said. He stopped the car at the corner. "And whoever's in those vehicles knows we just arrived." As if to confirm it, the driver's door of the nearer vehicle opened. A man got out. He was large, moving with the deliberate, unhurried quality of someone who has assessed the situation and made a decision. He looked directly at Vincent's car. Then Torres was out of the passenger side with his credentials up and his voice up, and the nearer vehicle's occupants were suddenly recalculating, and Vincent was out of the driver's side, moving toward the building entrance because Sal was inside, and he was not going to sit at a corner and wait. The building door was unlocked. He went in. A stairwell, 3 flights, the sound of his own footsteps hard on the concrete. Second floor. A corridor. He went to the third door on the left, the Pontiac secondary, a location he had set up 2 years ago for exactly this kind of contingency and had hoped never to use. And knocked twice, paused, knocked once. The door opened. Sal had a gun in his hand and his jacket was torn at the shoulder, and there was blood on the side of his face that was not old blood. He stepped back to let Vincent in. Ricci was inside, standing by the window at an angle that kept him out of the sight line from the street. "They tried to come up 20 minutes ago," Sal said. "2 of them. I held the stairwell. They pulled back." He looked at Vincent with the expression of a man who had just done something that cost him considerably and was still running on the adrenaline of it. "Vincent. One of them. The one in front." His jaw tightened. It was Carmine Vital. Carmine Vital. Vincent's second captain. 8 years in the organization. The man who had sat across from Vincent at every significant meeting for nearly a decade and had managed the Northern Territory with a competence and discretion that Vincent had regarded as one of the organization's genuine strengths. The second name. After Danny Ricci, the compromised one, the coerced one, Carmine Vitale was the second source. Except Vitale had not been coerced. Vitale had come to the stairwell with a weapon to eliminate a witness. That was a different category entirely. From outside, through the window, the sound of additional vehicles arriving. Sal looked. "Feds," he said, with a quality of relief that he didn't bother to modulate. Torres's voice from the stairwell, loud and official. The situation on the block resolving into a different configuration. Vincent stood in the middle of the room and looked at Ricci. "Harwick Road," he said. "They're moving on it now." Ricci's face did something complicated and painful. He nodded once, tightly, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was adequate to the specific terror of waiting for news about your child while standing in a room where you can't move or act or do anything but wait. They waited 19 minutes. Torres came into the room at the 11-minute mark and began coordinating with federal personnel who arrived in a sequence over the following 8 minutes. The 2 men from the vehicles outside were in custody. One of them was already cooperating, or at least indicating a willingness to cooperate, which in Vincent's experience was not the same thing, but was often the beginning of the same process. The call about Harwick Road came at the 19-minute mark. Torres took it, listened, spoke briefly, then lowered the phone and looked at Ricci. "She's alive," he said. "She's being transported to St. Anthony's Medical Center now as a precaution. She's physically unharmed." Ricci sat down on the floor. Just sat down where he was standing, his back against the wall and his knees up and his head back, and made a sound that was not quite a word and was not quite a breath, but was what a man sounds like when the thing he has been afraid of for 9 weeks has just failed to happen, and his body doesn't know yet what to do with the absence of that fear. Vincent looked away. Gave him the moment. Torres came to stand beside Vincent. "Harwick Road facility," he said quietly. 3 individuals in custody. One of them is talking. He's saying the operation was contracted through a financial intermediary. No direct contact with the principal. But the intermediary's name is in his phone and we're running it now. He paused. Cole wants you back at the federal building. I know, Vincent said. There's something else. Torres chose his next words with care. Carmine Vitale. We have him in custody from the stairwell confrontation. He's asking to speak to you directly. He says there's something you need to know before you go back to Cole. Vincent looked at Torres. About what? About who else in your organization has been feeding information to Weston's people. Torres's voice was level. He says it's not just him and Ricci. He says there's a third person, someone closer to you than either of them. The room was very quiet. Ricci was still on the floor against the wall. Sal was by the window. Everyone in the room heard it. Vincent thought about the Aldrin building, about his father's office, the office that was now his office, and the 14th-floor view of the city and the desk where the envelope had appeared without explanation, despite 3 layers of security and cameras covering every approach. He thought about who had access to all of those systems, who had always had access and had never been questioned because the question had never occurred to him. Where is he? Vincent said. Patrol car, downstairs. He went down. Vitale was in the back of a federal vehicle, wrists cuffed in front of him, collar open. The specific dishevelment of a man who had been through a physical confrontation and lost. He was 44 years old and had the kind of face that had always seemed to Vincent to be built for reliability. Broad, composed. The face of a man who communicated solidity simply by existing. That face looked different now. Reduced in some way, like a structure after a wall has been removed. Vincent got into the back seat beside him. The federal agent outside closed the door. They sat for a moment in the sealed quiet of the vehicle. Who? Vincent said. Vitale looked at the back of the front seat. How long have you known about my involvement? Since this morning. Who? Carmine. Vitale's hands moved slightly in the cuffs, a reflexive gesture, the body trying to do something the restraints wouldn't allow. I need something in exchange for the name. You're not in a position to negotiate with me, Vincent said. His voice was not raised. It was the low, absolute voice that his father had taught him, and that he had spent 20 years deploying in rooms like this one, except that those rooms had always been rooms where Vincent held all the leverage, and this room was a federal patrol car where he held none. He used the voice anyway because it was the truth of him, the irreducible thing, and he was not going to shed it in the last hours of everything he had built. Tell me the name or don't. But don't insult both of us by pretending you have chips to play. Vitale looked at him. The composure of the broad, reliable face was completely gone now, and what was underneath was simply a tired man who had made a decision he couldn't unmake and was living in the first minutes of understanding what the rest of his life was going to feel like. Marco, Vitale said. Marco Fenn. Vincent heard the name and felt it land in a place well below the level where he processed information rationally. Marco Fenn had been his personal security coordinator for 7 years. He managed the building systems for the Aldrin building. He managed the camera networks, the access logs, the physical security protocols. He was the reason an envelope had appeared on Vincent's desk without any camera recording it. He had deleted the footage. He had known about Harlow because he had access to Vincent's private communications. He had been Weston's deepest source, closest in, for however long Weston had been building this. 7 years. The man who had controlled Vincent's physical safety for 7 years had been feeding information to the man who had wanted Carlo's files badly enough to commit murder. Vincent sat with this for 3 seconds. Then he got out of the patrol car. Torres was waiting. Fenn, Vincent said. Marco Fenn. He's at the Aldrin building right now, or he was this morning. He's Weston's primary source inside the organization. He has access to every security system and every communication channel in that building. If he knows we're moving on Weston, he may be in the process of destroying records. Torres had his radio up before the sentence was finished. What followed was the 40 most compressed minutes of Vincent Moretti's life. Federal units deployed to the Aldrin building. Marco Fenn was found in the server room on the 12th floor with a drive wipe program running on 3 of the building's communication servers. He was taken into custody before the wipe completed, which meant the data was recoverable, which meant 7 years of communications managed through a compromised security system were now recoverable by people with federal data recovery resources. Raymond Weston was taken into custody at his office on the 23rd floor of the Meridian Financial Center at 11:34 a.m. His attorneys arrived within 11 minutes and began doing what attorneys do, which was their right and their function and would slow certain things but would not stop them. The sequence was too far along, the evidence too complete, the voluntary contact too well documented to be unwound by even the most expensive legal intervention in the city. The Caruso family's operation against Vincent's organization, the coordinated port access, the captain-level negotiations, the territorial absorption that had been structured as a controlled handover, collapsed within hours as the federal activity made it clear that the asset they had been promised was no longer available and the infrastructure they had expected to acquire was now frozen pending investigation. By 2 in the afternoon, federal units had executed warrants at 7 locations connected to the 3 crime families implicated in Carlo Moretti's files. The port operations were suspended. Financial accounts connected to the front companies in the records were frozen. The men whose names appeared in the most recent decades of Carlo's documentation, the ones still active, still operating, were being located and processed with the systematic efficiency of an operation that had been building its own parallel structure for 4 years and had just been handed the capstone evidence it needed. Vincent sat in a conference room on the 7th floor of the federal building and watched it happen through the glass walls, the movement of personnel, the speed of it, the institutional machinery that had been waiting for exactly what he had put into that cardboard box. He sat with Marcus Hale beside him and said very little and did not move for a long time. Cole came back into the conference room at 2:17 p.m. She sat down. She looked at Vincent with the focused attention that had been there since the beginning and added to it now a quality that was not quite satisfaction, closer to the expression of someone who has been doing something very difficult for a very long time and has just crossed a threshold they weren't certain they would reach. Weston's attorneys are already arguing that his morning submission to the U.S. attorney preempts your cooperation agreement, she said. We're going to fight that. The sequence of contact is documented, and it favors your position. She paused. What I need from you now is a formal statement covering the complete chain of custody for the files, beginning with your receipt of the envelope at the Aldrin building and ending with your delivery of the box to this office this morning. All right, Vincent said. After that, we'll begin the formal cooperation framework discussion with Mr. Hale. She looked at him steadily. I want to be honest with you about what that framework is likely to look like. The cooperation value is extraordinary. The evidence is extraordinary. Your voluntary proactive contact before any indictment is a significant factor in your favor. But the crimes documented in those files that directly involve your own conduct, your 6 years running the organization, are not going to disappear as a consequence of cooperation. What cooperation does is change the structure and duration of what you face. It does not eliminate it. I know, Vincent said. You understand you are going to prison. Yes. She looked at him for a moment. Most people in your position, when they walk through that door, they're looking for a way out of consequences. You didn't come in here looking for a way out. No, Vincent said. I came in here looking for a way to end it. He paused. There's a difference. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, the federal building moved with the specific energy of an institution in the middle of something significant. People walking fast, phones active, the low constant hum of systems processing and organizing and preparing. The city beyond the 7th floor windows was doing what it always did, continuous and indifferent, and somewhere in it the empire that Vincent had inherited from his father and run for 6 years was in the process of being taken apart piece by piece, and Weston's carefully constructed edifice of respectability was collapsing in real time, and Danny Ricci's daughter was being examined by doctors at St. Anthony's Medical Center with no physical injuries, and Elias Harlow was in a morgue somewhere with a file of documents that had finally done what he had carried them for 6 years to do. Vincent looked at his hands on the table, the same hands he had used for 20 years to build and maintain something his father had never wanted and had spent a lifetime trying to find a way to end. He looked at them for a long moment, noting their steadiness, noting the absence of the tremor that adrenaline sometimes produced, and that he had always suppressed in rooms where trembling was a kind of confession. They were steady now. They had been steady all day. He thought about his father sitting in the chair in the office on the 14th floor, about the letter, about the 15 pages of compressed and guilty hope that a man had written 2 months before he died and directed toward a son he hadn't known how to tell the truth while he was alive. He thought about what it had cost Carlo to keep the secret, and what it had cost him to keep the records, and what it had cost everyone who had existed inside the organization or in proximity to it for 40 years. All the accumulated cost of a single catastrophic choice made by a young man in 1981 who had been given no good options and had chosen the one that let his family survive. The cost had been paid forward, generation to generation, the way debt compounds. Until now. Cole set a legal pad on the table in front of him. "Start at the beginning," she said. "The envelope. Tell me exactly what happened when you found it." Vincent pulled the pad toward him, picked up the pen, looked at the blank page. He thought of one more thing his father had written near the end of the 15 pages, a single sentence that hadn't fully landed when he first read it, but was landing now with the full weight of everything that had happened since. "The only way out was always through, but I could never bring myself to start walking." He started talking, and outside on 5th Street, 3 federal vehicles pulled away from the curb in close formation, heading toward the Aldrin building, and across the city in 7 simultaneous locations, the coordinated machinery of consequence was finally, irrevocably, in motion, and the empire that had taken 40 years to build was coming down in a single afternoon. And Vincent Moretti, who had walked into this building carrying his father's secrets in a cardboard box, was sitting in a conference room on the 7th floor with a pen in his hand and a blank page in front of him, and was, for the first time in his life, not afraid of what came next. The formal statement took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Vincent talked, and Cole's people recorded, and Hale occasionally redirected, and the afternoon light moved across the 7th floor windows in the slow way that light moves when you have stopped tracking time and started tracking something else. The shape of a life, the sequence of decisions, the particular geography of how a man arrives at a moment where the only honest thing left to do is describe everything he has done and let other people decide what it means. He was precise. He did not minimize. He did not editorialize in his own favor. When Hale tried once to soften the framing around a specific sequence of events from the second year of Vincent's leadership, Vincent looked at him and said quietly, "Let it stand." And Hale looked at him for a moment and then nodded and let it stand. When it was finished, Cole turned off the recorder. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet after something significant has been spoken into them and the speaking is done. "We'll have a draft cooperation framework to Mr. Hale by tomorrow morning," she said. "The prosecution's recommendation will reflect the full scope of cooperation, the proactive nature of the contact, and the extraordinary value of the evidentiary package." She paused. "There will be a recommendation for a reduced sentence. I want to be honest with you. Reduced is not eliminated. We are talking about a federal sentence. Years, not months." "I understand," Vincent said. "Is there anything you need before you leave this building tonight?" Vincent thought about it. "Ricci's daughter, Sophia. I want to know her condition." Cole looked at someone in the corridor through the glass who made a call. 30 seconds later, the answer came back. Sophia Ricci had been treated at St. Anthony's for dehydration and mild sedation effects, and had been discharged into her father's care 2 hours earlier. She was physically unharmed. Vincent nodded once. "That's all," he said. He left the building with Hale at 6:43 p.m. The evening had come in while they were inside. The city in that specific blue-gray light that falls between the end of the workday and the beginning of the night. The street shifting from one kind of populated to another. Vincent stood on the sidewalk in front of the federal building on 5th Street and looked at the city for a long moment. Hale stood beside him, briefcase in hand, and said nothing, which was the most useful thing Hale had done all day. "Go home, Marcus," Vincent said. "I'll be in early tomorrow. The framework negotiation is going to be—" "I know. Go home." Hale looked at him for a moment. Then he put his hand briefly on Vincent's shoulder. Not a gesture of comfort exactly, more the gesture of a man acknowledging that another man is still standing after something that should have knocked him down, and walked to his car. Vincent stood on the sidewalk alone. He did not call a driver. He walked through the evening city, 12 blocks in no particular hurry, hands in his jacket pockets, the cold air working at his face, and the sound of the city all around him. He had walked these streets for 20 years as a man who owned significant pieces of what happened in them: the commerce, the infrastructure, the arrangements that made certain things possible and certain other things impossible. He walked them now as a man who owned nothing and was responsible for everything, and would spend a significant number of years in a federal facility accounting for the distance between those two conditions. He did not feel light. He had expected in some vague way that this would feel like something being lifted. It did not. What it felt like was the specific exhaustion that follows not the end of a fight, but the end of the thing that made fighting necessary. A deeper tiredness than physical, the kind that settles in the bones and the chest and does not resolve overnight. He walked to the Aldrin building. He had not planned to. His feet simply went there, the way they had gone there 10,000 times over 6 years, and he found himself standing on the sidewalk across the street, looking up at the 14 floors of glass and steel that he had run as both a legitimate real estate operation and the nerve center of everything that was not legitimate. And he stood there for a while, watching the light in the windows and thinking about his father. The federal presence was visible. 2 vehicles parked at the building entrance, agents moving through the lobby visible through the glass doors. The building had been secured, its systems accessed, its records flagged for preservation. By tomorrow morning, the process of dismantling the operational infrastructure housed inside it would be well underway. The front companies, the account networks, the arrangements with politicians and port officials and union representatives, all of it documented in Carlo's files, all of it now in the hands of people whose job was specifically to follow those documents to their destinations. Vincent looked at the 14th floor window, his office, the desk where the envelope had appeared. He thought about the night this had all started, the index card, the block letters, his name stripped of everything that usually surrounded it. He thought about how he had sat in that office and counted to 11 and felt something crawl through his chest that he recognized, much later, as the first honest thing he had felt in years. He turned and walked away. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Vincent was in the safe house on Meridian Street. The same kitchen table, the same bare overhead bulb, the cardboard box now gone, its contents in a federal evidence facility. When Sal knocked and came in and sat down across from him without being asked, and set a cup of coffee on the table between them and said nothing for a while. They sat like that for several minutes. 2 men who had spent 9 years in proximity to each other inside something that no longer existed, sitting in a kitchen above a dry cleaner, drinking coffee in the early morning quiet. "What happens to the men?" Sal said finally. "Not the captains, not the leadership. The men. The lower-tier members of the organization. The ones who had joined for reasons that were rarely as simple as greed or ambition, and were almost always entangled with circumstance and necessity and the particular mathematics of options available to men who grew up in certain neighborhoods with certain limitations, and found that this was the thing that was available and took it. The ones who cooperate have a path," Vincent said. "The ones who don't cooperate face what they face. The evidence in those files doesn't reach most of them directly. It's the organizational structure that gets dismantled, not every individual in it. Most of them will cooperate. Most of them will." Sal turned his coffee cup in his hands. He had a cut above his ear from the stairwell confrontation the previous day. Not deep, but visible. A thin, dark line at his hairline. "I've been doing this for 9 years," he said. "I don't know how to do anything else." "You'll learn." "That easy?" "No," Vincent said. "Not easy, but possible." He looked at his own cup. "Most things that matter are possible without being easy. I spent 20 years confusing the two." Sal was quiet for a moment. "Vitale," he said. "I keep thinking about Vitale. 8 years. I had dinner with that man's family." "I know." "How do you not see it?" "You see what people show you," Vincent said. "Vitale showed us loyalty because loyalty was his cover. The people who fool you longest are the ones who understand exactly what you're looking for." He paused. "My father had an accountant for 20 years who kept his most dangerous secrets and never told anyone. The difference between Harlow and Vitale is that one of them chose what they were protecting. He let that sit. You can't always tell which kind of person you're looking at until the pressure is high enough. Vitale's pressure was money. Harlow's pressure was the same, and he held anyway. Sal looked at him. And me. You held, Vincent said simply. Sal nodded. He drank his coffee. After a while, he said, "What do I do today?" "Today you go see Marcus Hale. He'll walk you through the cooperation framework as it applies to you. Your exposure is manageable. You came to the federal building voluntarily. Your access log evidence helped identify Vitale and Ricci's circumstances, and the timeline documents show your investigative work on the port intrusion was genuine." Vincent paused. "You're not walking away from this without consequences. But you're walking." Sal absorbed this. "And you?" "I'm not walking," Vincent said. "Not for a while." The cooperation framework document arrived at Hale's office at 9:15 the following morning. It was 42 pages. Hale spent 3 hours with it and called Vincent with his analysis, which was careful and precise and ultimately confirmed what Cole had said in the conference room. The cooperation value was reflected significantly in the prosecution's recommendation, and the reduction was real, and the sentence was still a sentence. 7 years. Federal facility. Eligibility for review at 5 with full cooperation credit applied. Vincent listened to Hale read the relevant sections. He asked 3 questions, all procedural. He said he would sign. "There's one more thing," Hale said. "Cole's office received something this morning. Weston's attorneys filed a motion claiming that Weston's morning submission to the U.S. attorney constituted prior cooperation and should be weighted equally with yours." A pause. Cole's response is that Weston's submission was an attempt to preemptively neutralize a witness rather than a genuine cooperation effort, and that the evidence he submitted was selectively curated to implicate you while protecting himself. She's filing a countermotion supported by the Harwick Road evidence and the Fenn communications records. Another pause. She says she's confident. She should be, Vincent said. Weston isn't a cooperating witness. He's a man who tried to buy his way out of a building that was already on fire. He thought about the careful, neutral voice on the phone, the 35 years of civic reputation, the hospital board seats and the charitable foundations and the newspaper profiles. How long before his trial? Complex financial crimes at that level, with his resources for legal defense. 18 months, possibly 2 years before it reaches a courtroom. But the pretrial detention question is being argued today. Cole is pushing hard on the Harlow homicide as a flight risk factor. She'll get it, Vincent said. Weston spent 35 years building a life that depended on not being seen as what he was. The moment that life is publicly compromised, there's nothing keeping him here. He was right. The pretrial detention ruling came down that afternoon. Raymond Weston, charged with homicide in the first degree in the death of Elias Harlow, conspiracy to obstruct justice, extortion, and 3 counts of financial crimes connected to the 1980s transactions documented in Carlo Moretti's records, was remanded to federal custody pending trial. His attorneys filed an immediate appeal. The appeal was denied by morning. Vincent received the news from Hale in a text. He read it in the Meridian Safe House kitchen and set the phone down and sat for a while. Then he picked up the phone and called a number he had found in the back of his father's final folder, a number written in the same compressed, slightly left-leaning script, with a name beside it, Elena. His mother had been living outside the city for 11 years. She had left after Carlo died, had moved to a smaller place in a smaller town, had spent the subsequent years in the particular quiet of a woman who has survived something she never fully described and has decided to let the surviving be enough. Vincent had spoken to her by phone. He had visited 4 times. He had never told her about the files because he hadn't known about the files. She answered on the second ring. Vincent. Her voice was the voice of a woman in her early 70s who had once been something more jagged and had been worn smoother by years and distance. Not softer, smoother. There was a difference. I've been watching the news. Then you know most of it. I know what the news is saying. That's not the same as knowing it. A pause. Are you all right? I'm going to prison, Ma. I know that. Her voice didn't waver. That's not what I asked. Vincent held the phone and looked at the far wall of the kitchen and thought about how to answer that honestly, which was the only kind of answer he had left in him. I found the files, he said. Papa's records, all of it. He paused. I know what happened in 1981. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that he thought the call had dropped. He told you, she said finally. Not a question, more the sound of something that had been held in place for 40 years gently releasing. He told me in writing, from 2 months before he died. Vincent's voice was level. He kept it level with the same discipline that had kept him functional for the last 72 hours. But it cost more now. He said he was afraid you would hate him. I never hated him. She said it immediately, without preparation. The immediacy was its own kind of completeness. I was afraid for 30 years, and angry for part of that, but I never hated him. A pause. He carried it every day? I could see him carrying it, and I couldn't help him put it down because putting it down meant opening it up, and neither of us was brave enough. Her voice shifted slightly. You were braver. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice. That's the thing your father never understood. She paused again. He thought the trap was the choice, that once you were in it, the choices were over, but you had the same trap and you found a different choice. Vincent heard her breath. I'm proud of you. I know that's a strange thing to say when you're going to prison. I'm saying it anyway. He couldn't speak for a moment. He pressed the phone against his ear and looked at the ceiling and breathed through it. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the way his father had taught him when he was 7 years old, and the lesson had been about something else entirely, but the technique had lasted. I'll come see you before I go in, he said. I'll make dinner, she said. As if it were that simple. As if a woman could make dinner, and a man could come to eat it, and the 40 years of wait between them could be set down at a kitchen table somewhere and left there when they finished. Maybe it could, he thought. Maybe that was exactly how it worked. He spent the following days in a sequence of meetings with Hale that covered the cooperation framework in detail, the timeline of processing and sentencing, the logistics of what came next. He signed documents. He gave additional statements. He sat across from Cole twice more and answered questions that filled gaps in the evidentiary record and pointed investigators toward threads they hadn't yet pulled. He did all of it with the same precision and completeness that had characterized the first session. And Cole's people noted it in their records, and Hale noted it privately to Vincent as being, in 30 years of criminal defense work, unusual. Most people in your position hedge, Hale said. They give you enough to satisfy the agreement, and they hold back the parts that hurt them most. You haven't held back anything. There's no point, Vincent said. The files already say everything. I'm just confirming what's already documented. He paused. And I'm tired of holding things back. It's a full-time job. I've had it for 20 years and I'm done. Hale looked at him for a moment. Vincent, I've been your lawyer for 11 years. I think this is the first time I've believed that the person sitting across from me and the person you actually are line up completely. They've been lined up since the day I walked into Cole's building, Vincent said. I'm just catching up to them. 3 weeks after the cooperation agreement was signed, Raymond Weston's financial history was made public as part of the federal filing process. The specificity of Carlo's documentation, the dates, the amounts, the names of the Santoro family members Weston had partnered with in 1980, it was reproduced in court filings that became public record. The newspaper profiles and the hospital board seats and the civic reputation collapsed with the specific totality of things that are built on concealment, which is that they do not bend. They simply stop existing. 2 of the political figures implicated in Weston's subsequent financial dealings, men who had received contributions and facilitated favorable regulatory outcomes over 15 years, resigned within the same week. A third was placed under investigation. The mechanism that Weston had built to protect his position, which had fed on connections and influence and the careful management of who knew what, dissolved when the knowing became universal. The Santoro family, whose 1981 coercion of Carlo Moretti had set the entire chain in motion, had already been significantly weakened by federal pressure over the preceding decade. The additional evidence in Carlo's files, combined with the testimony of assets developed through the Caruso cooperation that followed the collapse of that family's attempted expansion, was sufficient to bring RICO charges against three of the Santoro family's current leadership figures. The organization that had destroyed Carlo Moretti's life and freedom at 32 years old ceased to exist as a functional criminal enterprise within 6 months of Vincent's cardboard box arriving on the 7th floor of the federal building on 5th Street. The Caruso family negotiated a mass cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors, 47 individuals. It was the largest single organized crime cooperation event in the northeastern United States in 11 years. Danny Ricci entered a cooperation agreement of his own. His sentence, reflecting the coercive circumstances of his involvement and the full scope of his cooperation, was 18 months. He served 14. He and Sophia relocated to the Pacific Northwest after his release, to a city neither of them had lived in before, which was what Ricci had said he would do if he ever got the chance, and which Vincent, when he heard about it through Hale, found himself hoping worked out the way Ricci intended it to. Marco Fenn, Weston's deepest source, and the man who had deleted the camera footage from the 14th floor of the Aldrin building, received 12 years. He did not cooperate meaningfully. His silence was, in Vincent's reading of it, the silence of a man who had made a transaction and considered himself bound by its terms even after the other party to the transaction was in federal custody. Vincent did not respect this, but he understood it. He had spent 20 years in a world where the terms of transactions were considered binding, even when the transactions themselves were crimes, and the internal logic of that world was consistent even when everything else about it was not. Carmine Vitale received 9 years. He cooperated partially, enough to reduce but not eliminate, which was consistent with the particular variety of moral arithmetic that characterized men who would sell out an organization but retained enough residual loyalty or residual self-image to stop short of full disclosure. Vincent did not visit him. He did not send word through anyone. Some debts are not the kind that get settled through conversation, and Vincent had learned in the last months of everything he had built that some distances were meant to stay distances. He visited his mother on a Thursday in late November, 6 days before he was scheduled to report to the federal facility. She had made dinner, as promised. The house was small and warm and smelled like food and the specific domestic organization of a woman who had spent a decade making a space entirely her own. She looked older than the last time he had visited and more settled in herself, the way some people settle when they stop bracing against something. They ate dinner. They talked about things that were not the organization and were not the trial and were not the files. She told him about a garden she had started in the spring, about a neighbor's dog she had become attached to, about a book she had read that she described as disappointing, but in a way that made it sound like she had found it interesting despite herself. He talked less and listened more, which was not his natural mode and cost him some effort, and was worth every bit of that effort. After dinner, they sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and the conversation slowed into the kind of quiet that is not absence but presence. Two people who have been through something together, separately and without speaking of it, and have arrived at a place where the not speaking of it is finished. "He left me a letter too," she said. "In the files. Harlow sent it to me after you found everything. I don't know how he knew to do that. Your father must have given him the instruction at the same time." She held her coffee cup. "I've read it 4 times. Vincent looked at her. "What did he say?" "That he was sorry, mostly." She paused. "And that you would know what to do. He was very specific about that. He said Vincent will know what to do. I don't know why he was so certain. He never told you anything." "He told me everything," Vincent said. "He just did it in writing after he was gone." He looked at the table. "I used to be angry about that. I've been trying to decide if I still am." "And?" "I understand it," he said. "I don't know if that's the same as not being angry, but I understand it. He was afraid and the fear won for 30 years, and then at the end he found a way to let go of the fear and let me carry it forward instead. That's not an ideal way to pass something on." He paused. "But it's what he had." His mother looked at him for a long time. The kitchen light caught the lines of her face, the specific aging of a woman who had been beautiful and was still something more durable than beauty. The architecture of a life lived under pressure and survived with the self intact. He would be proud of you, she said, whatever that's worth. It's worth something, Vincent said. He left at 9 o'clock. She walked him to the door and they stood on the small front step in the cold, and she put her arms around him the way she had not done since he was a boy, without self-consciousness, without modulation, just fully, the way people embrace when they understand that the next time they see each other will be on the other side of a significant amount of time. He held on longer than he would have expected himself to. "Come home when it's over," she said. "I will," he said. He drove back to the city alone. The highway was clear, and the night was cold and clear with it, the kind of cold that made the stars visible even above a city's light. He drove without the radio, without his phone, with nothing but the sound of the road and the particular interior quiet that had become, over the last weeks, a place he was learning to inhabit rather than fill. He thought about the organization, not with grief. Grief required the loss of something you wanted to keep, and he had not wanted to keep it, not really. Not once he understood what it had cost. What he felt was closer to the specific heaviness of completing something enormous and long, and finding that the completion itself contained no triumph, only the recognition of what the thing had required of everyone who had been part of it. The men who had built it and run it and served it and been consumed by it and left their families inside its shadow. Elias Harlow, who had honored a promise for 6 years and been killed within 3 days of fulfilling it. Carlo Moretti, who had walked into a trap at 32 and never walked out. There was no clean accounting for any of it. The ledger didn't balance. It never balanced, in Vincent's experience, not the financial ones and not the moral ones. You did what you could do with what you had, and you tried to make the cost of your choices fall on yourself, rather than on people who hadn't chosen. And sometimes you succeeded at that, and sometimes you didn't. And the measure of a man was not whether he had kept the cost from spreading. Almost no one managed that, but whether he had been honest about the spreading when it happened and had worked, at whatever cost to himself, to stop it. He had stopped it. Not cleanly, not without casualties. Not in time to save Harlow or to give Carlo the ending his father had deserved. But he had stopped it, and the machine was dismantled. And the men who had built the machine, and the men who had tried to bury its records, and the families that had grown fat on its operations, were all now answering to something that did not negotiate and could not be bought and was indifferent to reputation and connections and 35 years of carefully constructed respectability. He reported to the federal facility on a Tuesday morning in December. He drove himself. He parked the car, took the keys out of the ignition, and sat for a moment looking at the building through the windshield. Gray concrete, institutional windows, the flag moving slowly in a cold wind. He thought about his father's letter. The last line of the 15 pages. The only way out was always through, but I could never bring myself to start walking. He got out of the car. He walked to the entrance. He handed his identification to the officer at the desk, who processed it with the efficient neutrality of someone doing a job, which was what it was. And Vincent stood in the intake area and felt the specific quality of a threshold being crossed. Not the end of something and not the beginning of something, but the point between them. The narrow place where one becomes the other and you are briefly neither, suspended between what you were and what you are going to be, held in the still moment before the world resumes. He breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Then the door opened and he walked through it, and the door closed behind him, and the empire that had taken 40 years to build and 48 hours to end receded into the past where it belonged, and Vincent Moretti, who had once ruled through fear and had chosen, finally, to rule through something harder and more durable than fear, walked forward into the plain gray hallway and did not look back. Outside, the city continued. The streets moved with people who did not know his name, or his father's name, or the names in the files that had sat in a cardboard box for 6 years, waiting for someone brave enough to open them. The ports operated. The trucks moved through the intersections. The ordinary machinery of a city going about its life, indifferent to the particular drama that had just concluded in one of its federal facilities on a cold Tuesday morning in December, grinding forward as it always had, as it always would. In a small house outside the city, an old woman tended a garden that had gone dormant for winter and would come back in the spring. In a city on the Pacific coast, a man and his daughter were learning what it felt like to exist without the specific weight of a secret that had controlled 9 weeks of their lives. In a federal evidence facility, 40 years of a dead man's careful and courageous record-keeping sat in archival boxes, doing in death the work its author had not been able to do in life. And in a gray hallway in a federal building on a Tuesday morning in December, a man walked forward without looking back, carrying nothing except what he was, which was, for the first time in his life, enough.